The signal hit my console at 3:47 in the morning. Not a ping, not a routine burst, a tight, clean, mathematically structured beam of data that had no business existing anywhere near the Kuiper Belt. I had been awake for 19 hours at that point, running diagnostics on a relay antenna that kept throwing ghost readings, and I was tired enough that my first instinct was to assume I had made a mistake. I had not made a mistake. My name is Eris Thorne, Lieutenant, Signals Division, United Earth Space Authority. My posting was Relay Outpost November 7th, a pressurized metal tube floating at the outer edge of the solar system, staffed by 4 people and one very capable artificial intelligence we called Vera. November 7th existed for one purpose: to listen. We monitored electromagnetic frequencies across a wide band, logged anything unusual, and forwarded reports to the main analysis hub on Ganymede. It was quiet work. It was lonely work. Most days, the most exciting thing that happened was Vera telling me that a particular stellar wind pattern had shifted 2 degrees off its baseline projection. That morning changed everything. I pulled up the raw data and stared at it for a long time. The frequency was not natural. No pulsar, no magnetar, no known stellar phenomenon produces a signal with that kind of internal structure. It had rhythm. It had pattern. It had buried inside its layers something that looked very much like encoded information. Vera confirmed it 11 minutes after I flagged it. The word that appeared on my secondary screen was simple and absolute: deliberate. I sat back in my chair and looked at the viewport outside. The Kuiper Belt was dark and still and ancient, the way it had been for 4.5 billion years before any human being had ever drawn a breath. Somewhere out beyond it, something had sent this signal. Something that had aimed it carefully, packaged it precisely, and expected no one on this end to notice. I noticed. Vera and I spent the next 6 hours working on the encoding. I want to be honest about something. I am good at my job, but I am not a genius. What I am is stubborn. I do not let go of a problem once it has me. Vera was running decryption models while I worked through the structural logic of the signal by hand, mapping its layers the way my grandfather used to map old hiking trails, one careful step at a time, marking what I found before moving to the next section. At hour 4, Vera cracked the outer cipher. At hour 5, I found the key to the inner layer buried in a prime number sequence so elegant it made me feel something close to awe. At hour 6, the full header decoded. I read it 3 times. Galactic Council. Closed session 44,891. Agenda: the human question. I did not move for a very long time after that. I want to explain what that moment felt like because I think it matters. I am not a dramatic person. I do not cry easily. I have spent 8 years working in deep space, which has a way of making you very calm about very large things. But sitting there in the blue-green glow of my console screens, reading those words, I felt something shift deep inside my chest. The universe had just revealed that it was far larger and far more complicated than even our most optimistic scientists had dared to hope. There was a Galactic Council. It had been meeting for what sounded like an enormous span of time. And the subject of its most recent session was us. We were being discussed. Somewhere out in the dark, civilizations older than human history had gathered to talk about what to do with the small, loud, fast-moving species from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star. I sat on the information for 48 hours. I did not tell my crewmates. I did not log it in the standard report system. I spent those 48 hours reading everything I could decode from the signal, which was not much. The header, fragments of procedural text, and one full paragraph from what appeared to be an opening statement. The paragraph described humans as a Category 3 emergent species showing anomalous developmental acceleration and unpredictable trajectory potential. I read that paragraph perhaps 30 times. I wrote it out by hand on a piece of paper and pinned it above my console. On the morning of the 3rd day, I wrote a message to Admiral Louise Crane at Earth Command. I kept it short. You need to read the attached file. Do not reply through standard channels. Do not forward this to anyone until we have spoken directly. What I am sending you will change everything. Then I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and waited. Vera broke the silence after 4 minutes. The AI's voice was calm as always. Eris, your heart rate has been elevated for 49 hours. You should eat something. I laughed. It was a real laugh, The kind that surprises you. I went to the small galley and made myself a bowl of hot rice with a fried egg on top, and I sat by the viewport and ate it slowly while the stars burned cold and patient outside the glass. Out there, in some direction I could not yet name, a council of ancient civilizations had held a secret meeting. They had never expected a tired signals analyst eating cold rice in a tin can at the edge of the solar system to find it. That was their first mistake. Admiral Louise Crane moved fast. I had not known her personally before the message. She was several levels above my pay grade, but within 16 hours of my transmission, she had set up a fully encrypted back channel. And within 36 hours, I was looking at her face on a secure screen. She had the kind of eyes that processed information the way a search algorithm does, rapidly, completely, without wasted motion. She asked me 3 questions. She did not ask how I felt about what I had found. She did not express surprise. She said, "How certain are you of the decryption accuracy?" I said, 97% on the header, 88% on the body fragments. She said, "How long until you can get more?" I said, "Depends on whether more transmissions follow the same path." She said, "Pack what you need. You are going to Titan." I was on a fast courier ship within 4 days. The facility on Titan had no name on any public record. It existed inside a maintenance registry as Thermal Regulation Substation 14, which was either very clever or very boring, depending on your perspective. It occupied a pressurized dome on the southern shelf of a methane sea, and from the outside it looked exactly like what it claimed to be. Inside, it was something else entirely. There were 41 people working there when I arrived, pulled from signals intelligence, xenolinguistics, theoretical mathematics, and a handful of disciplines I had never heard of before. Everyone looked like they had not slept in a week. Everyone looked like they did not care. I fit in immediately. They called the project Lighthouse. The name came from one of the older analysts, a man named George Elliott, who had spent 20 years at Deep Space Listening Arrays before Crane recruited him. He said, "A lighthouse does 2 things. It warns of danger, and it guides ships home." We were, he said, trying to figure out which of those 2 things we were going to need more. The full signal archive we had intercepted was larger than the fragments I had initially decoded. Much larger. The original transmission had been a relay burst, a compressed packet of data bounced across multiple points before reaching the frequency range where I had caught it. With the full decryption team working and Vera running continuous models, we began to unpack it layer by layer over the following 3 weeks. What we found inside was extraordinary. The Galactic Council had been meeting in one form or another for 11,000 years. It had grown from an initial coalition of 7 species to its current membership of 47. It operated through a complex system of procedural rules that George compared to a combination of the UN Security Council and a very old ecclesiastical court. Decisions required different levels of consensus depending on their classification. And the session we had intercepted was classified at the highest level, a full assembly deliberation on a matter of galactic significance. The matter of galactic significance was us. I remember the moment we translated the full text of the Veth delegates' opening address. We had been working all night, and the light outside the dome had just begun to shift as Titan's dim sun crept over the methane sea. The Veth, we had learned, were one of the older council species, roughly 4,000 years of spacefaring civilization, with a reputation as precise thinkers and careful speakers. Their delegate had opened the session with a prepared statement running to about 3,000 words in the original. Our translation took another 6 hours to refine. When I read the finished version, I printed it out and carried it with me for the rest of the project. The Veth delegate said that humanity represented a probability anomaly. She said that according to the Council's developmental models refined over thousands of years and tested against dozens of emerging civilizations, humans should have experienced species-level collapse on at least 14 separate occasions in the last 2 centuries alone. She listed them: the climate disruptions, the resource conflicts, the biological crises, the proliferation of destructive technologies. 14 windows where the math said a species at our developmental stage would almost certainly fail to hold together. We had not failed. We had not even slowed down appreciably. We had passed through each of those windows and come out the other side faster and more capable than before. She did not say this with admiration. She said it the way you might describe a structural anomaly in a bridge that should have collapsed, with concern and a professional urgency to understand what was holding it up. Another delegate, from a species called the orth, raised what the transcript labeled a secondary concern. The orth representative noted that humanity's rate of technological adoption was not just fast by emergent species standards, it was fast by any standard. The Council's records showed that the average spacefaring species took between 800 and 1200 years to move from their first orbital flight to their first interstellar probe. Humans had done it in less than 200. The orth delegate said that when a variable falls that far outside the expected range, the responsible course of action is not to wait and see. It is to act. I sat with that line for a long time. Here is what struck me most. Reading through those transcripts night after night in the glow of the Titan facility, they were not wrong about the facts. Everything the Council said about human history was accurate. We had been chaotic. We had been destructive. We had moved through our own development at a pace that from the outside must have looked reckless. What the Council had gotten wrong was the conclusion they drew from those facts. They saw speed and assumed danger. They saw unpredictability and assumed threat. They looked at a species that had survived 14 near extinctions and decided the terrifying thing was that we had survived, rather than considering what surviving 14 near extinctions actually does to a species. It makes you adaptable. It makes you stubborn. It makes you very, very good at finding solutions in situations where no solution seems possible. Nobody in that council chamber appeared to have considered that angle. The vote was the last item on the session agenda. It was not a vote on whether to make contact, or how to approach us, or what a relationship between humanity and the galactic community might look like. It was a vote on quarantine, a formal council-level designation that would classify the Sol system as a restricted zone. No contact permitted. No trade. No exchange of any kind. The technical language made clear, enforcement measures to ensure compliance. They planned to put a wall around our solar system and let us sit inside it. The vote was scheduled to take place in 30 days from the date of the original session. Crane called a meeting of the full Lighthouse team the morning after we completed that translation. She stood at the front of a plane room and told us without any particular emphasis that we had 29 days to decide what humanity was going to do about it. She said the options as she saw them were 3: do nothing and hope the vote failed on its own, attempt to make contact through conventional signals and announce that we knew about the council, or do something else. She paused there and looked around the room. George Elliott spoke first. He said, "We know where they are meeting." Crane nodded once. The coordinates had been embedded in the relay bounce path. Vera had extracted them on day 11, and I had verified the calculation twice. Somewhere in a binary star system with no designation in any human catalog, there was a structure. A meeting place. A table around which 47 civilizations had sat for 11,000 years to decide the shape of the galaxy. Crane looked at me and said, "How confident are you in those coordinates?" I said, "Confident enough to fly there." She said, "Then that is what we are going to do." The ship they assigned us was not a warship. I want to make that clear because I think it matters enormously. Admiral Crane could have chosen to send something with teeth, something designed to make an impression through the language of force. She did not. She chose a long-range diplomatic courier. Sleek, fast, unarmed, and very visibly unarmed. It had been built for extended deep space travel, and its interior was more comfortable than anything I had worked in before. The crew was small. 9 people, plus myself. The pilot was a quiet man named Oliver Hatch, who had spent 14 years flying resupply routes to the outer colonies and seemed to view the most significant mission in human history with the same calm attention he gave to everything else. The ship's doctor was Nina Foster, 43 years old, who had once spent 11 months alone at a research station on Europa. The rest were specialists, signals analysts, a xenobiologist named Peter Graves, and a small team of diplomatic protocol experts. We called the ship Audacity. That was not its official designation. Courier November 7th was, but Oliver suggested it one evening at dinner, and the name stuck. I spent the transit time studying. I had access to everything Lighthouse had translated. Every session fragment, every delegate profile, every procedural rule, every cultural reference embedded in the formal language of council communication. I read it all. Peter Graves sat with me most evenings, and we talked through what we were learning, not just the facts of it, but the texture. The way the council members addressed each other. The weight of specific formal phrases. The difference between a statement of concern and a statement of opposition, which in council protocol were two very different things with very different procedural consequences. I was building a map not of space, but of minds. Peter said to me on the 7th day, "You are treating this like a cipher." I said, "It is a cipher. Every new culture is. You find the underlying logic, you find the pattern, and then you can navigate it." He said, "What if their underlying logic is too different from ours to navigate?" I said, "Then we pay very close attention and we adapt. That is what we do." He smiled at that. It reached his eyes. We dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the binary star system on day 19. I was on the bridge when we arrived, and I watched the two stars resolve on the forward display, one orange-white, one cooler and redder, orbiting each other in a slow ancient dance. Between them, in a gravitationally stable zone that someone had clearly chosen with great care, there was a structure. It was larger than anything human beings had ever built in space. Larger than any space station, any orbital platform, anything I had been able to imagine when I read the council records and tried to picture their meeting place. It was not flashy. It did not glow with dramatic light. It was a dark, complex geometry, layers upon layers of structured material that caught the binary starlight in ways that shifted as we moved. It looked, if I am being honest, like something that had grown rather than been built. Like a coral reef scaled up to the size of a small moon and given shape and intention. I stared at it for a long time. Then Vera opened a channel and told me we were being hailed. The hailing signal was not in any human language. It was in council protocol, the formal communication standard we had decoded from the session transcripts. The message was a standard challenge. Identify yourself. State your origin. State your purpose. Await instructions. I answered in council protocol. I had been practicing for 19 days. The formal language had a structure that was difficult in ways English was not difficult. It required you to encode the speaker's relationship to the listener in every sentence and to specify the nature of your claim to be speaking at all. I had worked out the phrasing with Peter and with George Elliott over the radio from Titan. I stated our origin as the third planet of the Sol system. I stated our purpose as participation in the current session. I used the formal phrase that council records showed was used by recognized members when arriving for a scheduled deliberation. We were not recognized members. But the phrase bought us something more valuable than a polite response. It bought us silence. And silence in council protocol means the other party is conferring. The silence lasted 9 minutes and 40 seconds. I counted. Then a different channel opened. This one was not using the standard hailing protocol. It was using a direct address format, the kind used between senior delegates when a matter required immediate private discussion. A voice came through, translated in real time by Vera with a smoothness that still amazes me when I think about it. You should not be here. This location is unknown to your species. Explain how you came to know these coordinates. I looked at Oliver, who was watching me from the pilot's seat with an expression of complete calm. I looked at Peter, who gave me a small nod. I looked at the forward display, at the structure hanging between the twin stars, at the representatives of 47 civilizations who were currently, I knew, in the middle of a session to decide whether to close a wall around our solar system forever. I pressed the transmit control and said, "We found your signal. We decoded it. We plotted your location from the relay path. We built a ship, and we flew here. I understand that this is unexpected. I understand that this is not how things are done at this council. But I would like to suggest that the fact we are able to do this at all is something you should consider carefully before you hold your vote." The channel stayed open. I could hear, faintly, what sounded like a great deal of very rapid conversation on the other end. I sat back and waited. Oliver said quietly, "Well done." Nina handed me a cup of tea. I drank it and watched the structure between the stars and felt something I had not expected to feel in that moment. Not fear. Not excitement, exactly. Something older and quieter than either of those things. Something that felt like standing at the beginning of a very long road and finally being able to see, for the first time, where it was going. 10 minutes later, The channel opened again. The same voice. "You will hold your position." "We are conferring," I said. "We will hold our position. Take all the time you need." I set the cup down and looked at the stars. They gave us 2 hours to wait. And then they gave us an argument to make. The communication that came through after those 2 hours used formal council language that Vera translated as conditional access for the purpose of addressing a procedural anomaly. In plainer terms, we were being allowed in because what we had done, arrive uninvited with knowledge we should not have, technically created a situation that their rules required them to address. They had to hear from us, at least briefly, or the procedural record of the session would be incomplete. I had not known that when I cited the formal arrival phrase. But George Eliot had. He had found the procedural rule buried in a footnote of a translated council governance document and told me about it on day 6 of our preparation on Titan. "If you use that phrase," he said, "and they know you are not a member, they will have to grant you access to correct the record. It will not give you much time. But it will give you something." It gave us 20 minutes. The docking process took 45 minutes by itself. Precise, automated guidance that brought Audacity into a pressurized bay designed to accommodate a wide range of ship configurations. The air inside, when the bay equalized, was breathable. Slightly higher oxygen than Earth normal, a different balance of trace elements, but breathable. Nina checked it twice before she let anyone remove their helmet seals. Oliver stayed with the ship. The rest of us went in. The corridor leading from the docking bay to the main assembly chamber was long, made of something that was neither metal nor stone but shared qualities with both. It was warm to the touch. The light came from sources I could not identify. No visible fixtures, just a diffuse, even illumination that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ceiling was high enough that I could not see it clearly. The corridor was wide enough to accommodate beings considerably larger than humans. We passed other delegates in the corridor. I had read descriptions of all 47 council species, but reading a description and standing 3 meters away from a living representative of a civilization 4,000 years older than yours are two very different things. I kept my expression neutral. I walked steadily. Peter walked next to me, looking at everything with the focused attention of someone trying to memorize every detail for later. The assembly chamber was enormous. I had tried to prepare myself for it. I had read the session transcripts and understood intellectually that this was a gathering place for the representatives of nearly 50 civilizations. But intellectual understanding and standing at the entrance of that chamber are not the same. The space rose above us in a curve that reminded me of the inside of a shell. Around its perimeter, arranged in a way that gave each delegation both visibility and a sense of separation, were the seating areas of 47 species. Some sat. Some stood. Some occupied arrangements clearly designed for bodies that moved and rested in ways human bodies do not. In the center of the chamber floor, there was an open space, and there, Vera told me, the speaking position was located. That was where I needed to go. The presiding delegate called our session to order with a sound I cannot properly describe, something between a tone and a spoken syllable that had a physical quality to it, a resonance I felt in my chest. Vera translated the formal opening. This council recognizes the presence of a representative of the species designated Category 3 Emergent, Sol System. This presence is acknowledged as a procedural anomaly. The representative will be given 20 minutes to address the chamber. 20 minutes. I walked to the center of the floor, stood in the speaking position, and looked out at 47 civilizations looking back at me. I had prepared a speech. I had worked on it for 19 days on the ship, refining it with Peter and the protocol team, and I knew it well enough to deliver it without thinking about the words. I had planned to begin with an acknowledgement of the Council's authority and a formal expression of respect for its history and purpose. I did not begin that way. I stood in the center of that vast chamber and said, in Council protocol, speaking clearly and steadily, "I know what this session is about. I know what the vote that is scheduled concerns. And I know that every civilization in this room has looked at my species and arrived at conclusions that feel, to you, entirely logical. I am not here to tell you that your concerns are wrong. I am here to tell you that your conclusions are." The chamber was very quiet. I continued. "You looked at our history and you saw chaos. You saw a species that moved fast and broke things and nearly destroyed itself repeatedly. You saw unpredictability, and you interpreted it as danger. I understand why. Unpredictability in a civilization that is still developing its reach is a reasonable thing to be cautious about. But I want to ask you something. When you look at our history, what do you see alongside the chaos? I paused for a moment. Not for effect. Because I genuinely wanted them to consider it before I answered. You see survival. 14 times, by your own council's models, we should have collapsed. 14 times we did not. Not because we were lucky. Not because some external force intervened. Because when human beings face a crisis, something happens that your models apparently do not fully account for. We come together. We argue and we disagree, and sometimes the process is ugly and slow. But we come together. We have done it with disease. We have done it with environmental collapse. We have done it with the kinds of internal conflicts that have ended other civilizations at our developmental stage. We have done it every single time. A delegate near the front of the chamber made a sound that Vera flagged as an expression of formal skepticism. I acknowledged it without breaking my rhythm. I heard that. And you are right to be skeptical. A pattern of past behavior is not a guarantee of future action. I am not here to guarantee anything. I am here to offer you a different way of looking at the same data you already have. A species that is genuinely dangerous does not, when it discovers a secret meeting about its own fate, send an unarmed diplomatic ship and ask to speak. It does something else. We came here without weapons. We came here without ultimatums. We came here because we believe that the correct response to discovering that our neighbors are afraid of us is to look them in the eye and have a conversation. Another delegate, from the section I had identified as the Veth delegation, made a formal interjection. Vera translated it immediately. The method by which the representative obtained this session's location constitutes a significant breach of Council security protocol. The ability to intercept and decode a closed Council transmission is itself evidence of the developmental pace that concerns this assembly. I nodded. Yes, it is. I am not going to pretend otherwise. You sent a transmission that you believed was undetectable, and we detected it. You encoded it in a cipher you believed was unbreakable, and we broke it. You chose a location you believed was unknown, and we found it. I understand that this is alarming. But I want to point out what we did with that capability. We did not use it as leverage. We did not transmit your session contents to our broader public. We did not approach this station with anything designed to cause harm. We came here, to this room, to have this conversation. Because that is what we believe the capability to find you should be used for. Not to exploit. To connect. The chamber was very still. I said, "You have been meeting for 11,000 years. In that time, you have seen civilizations rise and fall. You have seen species that grew powerful and turned that power inward and destroyed themselves, and species that turned it outward and became something your council felt it necessary to stop. I am not asking you to trust that we will never make mistakes. We will. We have. Our history is full of them, and it will continue to be, because we are young and the galaxy is very old. What I am asking you to trust is something smaller and more specific. I am asking you to trust that we came here to talk. And that we kept talking, even knowing you have the power to close the wall around our system and leave us inside it. That is not the behavior of a species that plans to consume the galaxy. That is the behavior of a species that is trying, in the best way it currently knows how, to be a good neighbor." I stopped speaking. The chamber was silent for what felt like a very long time, but was probably less than a minute. Then a sound came from the far end of the chamber, from a section I had identified in my preparation as occupied by the Keth Observer delegation. The Keth were unusual in the Council records. They were listed as founding members, which made them among the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the Assembly. They rarely spoke at sessions. When they did, other delegates listened. The Keth Observer said, in Council protocol, 3 words that Vera translated with a note flagging them as carrying significant formal weight within Council tradition. The formal weight of those 3 words, Vera explained later, came from the fact that they were not a motion and not a vote. In Council tradition, they were something older, a declaration of willingness made by an elder member that carried with it an implicit guarantee of continued engagement. The Keth were saying, in a language that 47 civilizations understood completely, "We will not close this door yet. We will watch and we will see. The presiding delegate called a recess before any formal vote could be taken. I walked back to where Peter was standing, and he looked at me with an expression somewhere between stunned and deeply satisfied. He said, "That was remarkable." I said, "Did I do it right?" He said, "I have no idea. But I think they were listening." They gave us an answer 4 days later. Those 4 days were not quiet. They were 4 of the most intense days of my life, spent in guest quarters designed for species quite different from humans. The furniture geometry was wrong. The light cycle did not match any human schedule. Outside our door, something was happening in the political landscape of a 47 civilization assembly that I could only partially follow. I knew there were arguments. The transmission said that much. The Veth delegation filed 2 formal objections. A coalition of smaller member species submitted a joint statement expressing strong opposition. There was a procedural challenge to the Keth Observer's declaration. But there were other things too. A mid-range member submitted a formal request to review the full transcript of my address. 2 other species followed. Peter pointed out that a request for transcript review was not neutral. It was a step taken when a member wanted to formally consider the content of a statement before taking a position. They were thinking about what I had said. On the morning of the 4th day, a formal communication arrived from the presiding delegate, addressed in Council protocol to the representative of the Category 3 emergent species, Sol System. I read it 3 times before I trusted my understanding of it. The Council had decided, by a margin the communication did not specify, to modify the proposed quarantine measure. Instead of a closed restriction, the Sol System would be designated as a provisional observation zone, a status that existed in Council tradition for emerging civilizations showing characteristics warranting continued monitoring. Under this status, no wall would be built. No restriction would be placed on our development or our movement. But a formal observation record would be opened, and humanity would be expected to engage with designated Council liaisons. There was a second component. Humanity was being offered provisional observer status within the Council itself. Not full membership. Observer status meant no vote, no formal standing in procedural debates, no binding voice in any Council decision. But it meant a seat. It meant presence. It meant that when the Council convened its next session, there would be a section of the chamber designated for the representative of the 3rd planet of the Sol System. And someone from Earth would sit in it. That someone, for now, was me. I sat with that for a while. Then I got up and told the crew. Oliver said it was the best outcome he could have imagined. Nina said she was going to need to write a very detailed medical report. Peter just looked at me with quiet relief. On the way to the observer section for the first time, we passed through a corridor overlooking the main assembly chamber. I stopped at the viewing port and looked down. The chamber was empty, the delegates were in recess, but the space itself was extraordinary even without anyone in it. The curve of the ceiling. The careful arrangement of the delegation areas. The speaking position at the center of the floor where I had stood 4 days earlier. I thought about the Veth delegate's words, probability anomaly. 14 windows. I thought about all the people who had worked at Lighthouse on Titan, who had spent sleepless weeks translating and analyzing. I thought about George Eliot, who had found the procedural rule. About Vera, who had cracked the first cipher in 6 hours. About my grandfather, who had taught me to read a compass and find north by the stars. I sent a message to Admiral Crane on the encrypted channel, "We have a seat. Provisional observer. No vote, but a presence. The vote on restriction has been suspended. We are in." She replied within minutes, "Understood. What do you need?" I said, "A better coffee supply and someone to help me draft a formal introduction statement for the next plenary session." She sent back a single line, "Both are already in transit." I laughed. Then I walked to the observer section and sat down in the seat that had been prepared for a human being for the first time in 11,000 years of Council history. The chamber below was quiet and vast. Through the structure's outer viewport panels, I could see the binary stars, the orange-white and the cooler red, turning around each other with slow, ancient patience. Out in the direction of those stars, too far to see, was another star. Smaller, yellower, more ordinary than either of them. Around it, a blue planet turned. On that planet, 8 billion people went about their lives, not yet knowing what had just happened. They would know soon. Crane was already working on how to tell them. The Keth observer entered the chamber below and moved to their section. They were slower than I had expected from the records, ancient in a way you could see just by watching them cross a room. They settled into place and then looked up. Directly at the observer section. Directly at me. I met their gaze. The Keth observer made a gesture that Vera translated after a moment of processing as a formal acknowledgement used between members when a long period of waiting had produced a result. The closest match in human language, Vera said, was something like, "The waiting was worth it." I did not know the equivalent gesture in council protocol, so I did what felt right. I put my hand flat against the viewport panel, the way you do when you want to reach through something transparent and make contact with what is on the other side. The Keth observer held still for a moment. Then they raised one of their limbs and held it level, parallel to the floor, in a gesture that Vera told me was not in the council protocol records. It was, as far as the AI could determine, new. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it was just a response to a response. Maybe two very old and very new things had just invented a small, wordless way of saying hello. I kept my hand on the panel until the presiding delegate called the chamber to order. Then I straightened in my seat, opened my translation interface, and paid attention. That is the most human thing I know how to do. Find the signal. Decode it. Show up. Pay attention. I had found a message in the dark at the edge of the solar system, eating cold rice in a tin can at the edge of everything humanity had ever reached. I had followed it here, to a seat at the oldest table in the galaxy. The session was beginning. I was ready. They gave us a seat. Not a vote, not yet, just a presence. A section of the great chamber labeled Provisional Observer, Sol System. A place where a human would sit when the council convened, listening, learning, being present. It was not everything we had hoped for when we first decoded that signal in the dark. But it was enough. For now. I stayed on the station for 3 more weeks after that first session. I sat in the observer section during every plenary meeting, took meticulous notes, and learned the rhythms of a body that had been deliberating for 11,000 years before my species learned to write. The other delegates grew accustomed to my presence. Some even nodded in my direction. The Veth delegate never did. But she stopped objecting to my presence after the second week. I considered that progress. Peter returned to Earth with the rest of the crew, but I kept in touch through the encrypted channels. He sent me a message on the 6th day. "They are calling you the signal catcher in the lighthouse briefings." George started it. It stuck. I wrote back, "Better than other things they could call me." He replied, "They are calling you other things too. But those are classified." I laughed at that. Alone in my quarters, watching the binary stars turn through the viewport, I laughed. The Keth observer never spoke to me directly, but they acknowledged me every session. That gesture, the limb raised level with the floor, became a ritual. I would put my hand against the viewport glass. They would respond. No words. Just recognition. On my last day before returning to Earth for consultations, I stood at the observation deck one final time. The chamber below was empty. The seats of 47 civilizations stood silent. But the space felt different now than it had when I first arrived. Less alien. Less intimidating. It felt like a room where I had been heard. I thought about the signal that started everything, the faint, impossible transmission I had caught at 3:47 in the morning on a lonely outpost at the edge of nowhere. I thought about the 14 collapse windows humanity had survived. I thought about the words the Keth observer had spoken, "Let them sit." I opened my personal log and wrote one final entry. We found a message in the dark. We followed it here. Not because we wanted to conquer or dominate or prove anything. Because that is what we do. We find signals. We decode them. We show up. And when we show up, we pay attention. The galaxy is old and vast, and we are young and small. But we are not alone. And we are not silent. We never have been. The transport back to Earth was quiet. I sat by the viewport, watching the stars stretch and fold as we moved through faster-than-light space. Somewhere behind me, the council station drifted between its twin suns, a place that had been waiting 11,000 years for someone like us to arrive. Ahead of me, Earth waited. 8 billion people who did not yet know that their neighbors had been watching, worrying, and almost closing the door. I would help tell them. It would not be easy. But humans had survived harder things. We had survived 14 collapse windows. We would survive this. The courier ship dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Sol system. Ahead, the sun burned small and familiar, not one of the grand binary stars of the Council Station, but home. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. The signal had been answered. The door was open. And somewhere out there, the Keth observer was probably already preparing for the next session. I smiled. Tomorrow, there would be work to do. Briefings to attend. A species to inform. A place at the table to earn. But tonight, I watched Earth grow larger in the viewport and let myself feel something I had not allowed since that first transmission crackled across my console. Not relief. Not victory. Just a quiet, steady certainty. We had found the signal. We had followed it. We had been heard. And that, I thought, was a very good start.